The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
For many people, the holiday season is all about family, but not for those estranged from parents or siblings. Tonight, we'll explore what drives such family division and why it's apparently on the rise. Then, author and Dr. Jean Marmorio is with us on her new book about why she took on the task of helping patients in search of medical assistance in dying. It's Monday, December 12th, and that's ahead on The Agenda. All families fight, bicker, fall out, and reconcile. But some don't do that last part. For some, the disagreements or disapprovals lead to irreconcilable differences. Parents and children or siblings who simply never speak again. And there are signs that it's becoming more common than ever. With us now for a closer look at what's often called estrangement, we welcome, in the Bay Area city of Orinda in Northern California, Joshua Coleman, Senior Fellow with the Council on Contemporary Families and author of The Rules of Estrangement: Why Adult Children Cut Ties and How to Heal the Conflict. And here in our studio, life coach Becca Bland, who is Chief Executive and founder of Standalone UK, the only charity of its kind in the world supporting people estranged from family. And clinical counseling and health psychologist Sonia Ahmed, who is director of the Toronto Psychology Clinic. And we're happy to welcome you, two guests here in our studio here in Toronto, and Joshua, you on the west coast of California, to our program tonight. Joshua, we're going to get to the whys of this soon, but let's start with this. When did you first notice that family estrangements were becoming a bigger thing?
Well, I saw a huge uptick in my practice probably in the mid 2000s. And, you know, I came to this topic because I was married and divorced in my 20s and have an adult daughter who I'm now very close to. But there was a period of time in her early 20s where she cut off contact with me for a couple of years, which is incredibly painful. There was nothing written at the time to help parents for it. And I eventually did work my way back to her. But going through that gave me a very profound sense of the kind of despair and heartbreak and sorrow and guilt and regret that estranged parents feel. So I wrote my first book about that topic in 2007. And as a result of that, got a wide following of parents both in here and in other Anglophone countries. And then as a result of that, developed a webinar series. I did my own research on the topic, culminating in my most recent book. So I've seen a huge uptick, really, I guess, in the past 15 years or so.
Okay. Becca, what does Standalone do?
So we are a charity that supports people who are estranged from their families or a key family member. So we support people from all kinds of estrangements. So people might be estranged from a parent, a child, a sibling, or the whole wider family. So yeah, we provide support groups, which we've just had a great clinical study that's proven how effective they are at reducing stigma and improving people's emotional well-being.
Do you come to this issue for the same reason Joshua did?
Yeah, personal experience of estrangement in my whole family through many generations has led me to an interest in this topic. And I think it's something I truly feel we need to speak more about in society to understand more and to know that not all families operate within this kind of very nuclear, close model that perhaps the media portray us to.
Sonia, in your practice, who wants to, typically speaking, who wants to be estranged from whom?
Typically, it's often adult children who are estranged from their parents. In terms of want to, it may not be something they necessarily wanted to do, but they had to do in order to take care of their personal well-being. It got to a place where the relationship was so toxic that even though people believe, you know, family sticks together, blood is thicker than water, it's just not possible to remain close to family if it's going to affect their own personal well-being.
Okay, Joshua, let's get into the whys then. Why does this seem to be happening more lately than previously?
Well, because the moral framework of what constitutes family has radically gone through a change in the past half century in particular, where the idea of honor thy mother and thy father, respect thy elders, has been replaced with a much more personal self-esteem, mental health, happiness, self-growth, identity-focused notion of relationships. It has to do with what the British sociologist Anthony Giddens refers to as pure relationships, that we've gone from role to self, a preoccupation with doing the right thing in terms of our role as a family member, to what's really good for our identity. So we have that on the one hand. We have the role of divorce, which in my research and other people's research has shown weakens family relationships. We have the role of social media, which serves as the kind of extended kin for both good and bad reasons. We have increasing tribalism, particularly in the United States, rising rates of individualism. So all of these factors contribute to a much more individualized view of family that is relatively new historically.
Okay, I got to follow up on that last part there because we cover a lot of politics on this show. It's not my imagination then that I seem to run into more people these days who say, you know, my parents love Trump and I just can't deal with that and I'm going to have to cut them off. That's a thing now.
It's a thing. Yeah, in the United States, according to one large survey, something like a third of family members are estranged because of political differences, which is really tragic. You know, the old days of agreeing to disagree, or, I'm certainly not a family is forever no matter what. I certainly think that there are plenty of cases where it is the healthiest thing to do to cut off a family member who say consistently against your sexuality or gender identity or won't take responsibility for the ways that they were abusive or hurtful. But I also feel like we become very fragile in what binds us together as family members, and which I think are very problematic.
Let me follow up on that with you, Becca, because, and I'm trying not to make this sound like a stereotype in asking this question, but it is said Gen Y and Gen Z tend to be snowflakier than previous generations. And I wonder how much of estrangement happens because their skin just is not thick enough.
I think that, I want to fundamentally disagree with that, as I'm sure you'd expect me to do. I think that my generation, Gen X, Gen Y, have got more time, they've got more inclination to do more personal work in therapy, to explore themselves, and also to explore the intergenerational trauma that their families may have brought to them. And so that means that they are more inclined to put stronger boundaries in place around difficult behaviours. So I wouldn't say it's flaky or having a thinner skin. I think it's actually just, my generation wants more healthy relationships, and they want their children to have more healthy relationships. So I think my generation see themselves as kind of like the cycle breakers, the people that want to in some way kind of make better behaviour more prevalent in families.
There was a term there, intergenerational trauma. You want to just give us a handy definition of what that means?
Intergenerational trauma, I see it as a disease that spreads through family relationships. And often some people choose to deal with that disease by changing the relationship dynamic, maybe distancing themselves or breaking their relationship with the family. But fundamentally, it's traumatic reactions that are perpetuated through the family dynamics because each person internalizes trauma a different way, the way they deal with their thoughts and their feelings, and then that affects their parenting. And how they parent then impacts the person, their children, and so on and so forth.
Now, you tell me if I'm right or wrong about this. In your practice, you work with a lot of new Canadians?
With a lot of new Canadians, primarily a lot of South Asians. That's my background.
Okay, yeah. And to what extent do these new generations who grow up in Canada, do they want to estrange from their parents because they're just, they're into a new way of living and they're not into all of the old customs from the old country, that kind of thing? What
I'm finding is that South Asian Canadians and a lot of new Canadians are trying to find ways to recreate their parents and their ancestral culture and still adapt to the culture that they are assimilating with here in Canada. So they're trying to find a third way, per se. And in trying to do that is difficult because change is hard, especially for new Canadians. It feels it's foreign, it feels threatening, and it needs to be done in a healthy way. So I find that it's not a complete cutting off in order to do their own thing, but trying to find ways to make it work so that they're still honoring family values. Yeah.
Becca, can you tell us when adult children want to, I don't even know what the right term is here, want to impose an estrangement on their senior parents, what kind of challenges and what kind of What are they facing in attempting to do that?
I think sometimes the language that we use here is sometimes a bit flippant about sometimes, that we need to, do something that's a really quick decision, whereas for many people, this is like laboured over for a long period of time. They've tried to make the relationship better. They've said what's the issue, and then there's been no progress. And so I think that what they're faced with is, in this situation, just a huge, difficult decision, and something that they will, ultimately there isn't a great outcome in either way, because it can be incredibly difficult to be estranged from a family member. It presents its own set of challenges, but it can also be incredibly difficult to stay in a very dysfunctional and abusive dynamic in a family relationship as well.
So follow up on that. What's the upside of estrangement?
Well, I think that, first of all, for the future generations of a family, there's kind of getting rid of really difficult behaviour. If somebody in your family isn't very willing to work on something or to change or to accept your point of view, be seeing you in how you want to be seen, in the changes you're trying to make in the dynamic, I think it's really, really important that, we can have a break. Like, why is it so hard to accept in society that we can have a break from relationships when in almost every other relationship in our society, it's okay to take time, it's okay to step back?
Because it sounds, Sonia, completely beyond the pale to want a break from people who gave you life. Is that fair to say?
Very absolutely. It's actually quite painful when one family member initiates an estrangement, the other family member didn't want that. It's very, very difficult. It's heartbreaking. It's like, especially if it's the parents, they gave everything, they sacrificed a lot. And again, as I work with New Canadians who left one country for another in order to give their children the best life possible, and then the child decides to take a break, it feels like a major betrayal.
Joshua,
I'd like to come in there and
please.
just say that actually I feel it could also be an opportunity. And so do we have to see it as a betrayal, or could we see it as an opportunity for some people to work on themselves and create better relationship values and behaviours that perhaps they never had the time when they were bringing up a small family to develop? So is it really right to say that it's a betrayal always, or is it somebody saying, I'm calling time because this isn't working? And for all of us, we need to have a break here to be able to kind of create something more healthy and more real.
Well, let me pick up on that with Joshua. Do you believe, Joshua, that adult children owe their parents something, even if they want to be estranged from them?
Well, can I step back for a second and address some of the earlier topics and come back to that? First of all, let's talk about the notion of trauma. There is an important study by Nick Haslam, who's a psychologist in Australia. And one of the things Haslam found was that he calls it concept creep, which is the idea that in the past 3 decades, there's been an enormous expansion of what we believe constitutes traumatic, harmful, abusive, and hurtful behavior. So a lot of what younger generations are calling any of those things to justify their estrangements are things that in the parents' generation would not have been considered any of those things. So there's often this very generational disconnect between what constitutes harmful, traumatic, or abusive behavior. And part of what my role is with doing family therapy is helping bridge that kind of cultural, generational gap. So I think it's a really important thing. Also, people don't estrange themselves just because of trauma and child abuse. They estrange themselves because they get married and their spouse doesn't like them. They get estranged because their parents get divorced and one parent poisons a child against the other parent, or the child independently blames one parent for breaking up the happy home. They get estranged not only because of the parent's mental illness or abusive behavior, because of the adult child's addictions or mental illness. They also then get estranged because a family member, parent, or adult goes into therapy, and that therapist misdiagnoses either the adult child or the parent, and that launches an estrangement. So I think it's critically important that we widen this discussion beyond traumatizing parents and snowflake children. A. And B, I think both generations owe something to the other. I think that parents owe to their adult children a willingness to take responsibility, to show empathy, to show compassion, to find the kernel, if not the bushel of truth in the children's complaints. I think adult children should try to see their parents as flawed, but trying the best they could, even when that best was not very good, to give them the opportunity to do therapy, to make amends, and to heal the bridge. So both generations owe the other more time, more care, more consideration.
Becca, is part of your organization's mission to bring people back from estrangement, or are you more focused on how to effect estrangement in a healthy way for everybody? What's the focus?
So I think it's really important that, we recognise that there's been a huge push towards reconciliation with a lot of services, and that ultimately what my charity does is take a very non-judgmental stance. And what we say is that you know what's best for your family relationship. We don't know. So, I could sit here and say I know what's best for every family relationship in Canada, but that would be a lie. I don't. Only you live within your family relationship. So what our organisation does is that it helps people to kind of look at the best way forward. For some people, they may desperately want reconciliation with a family member, and they may really want the behaviour to change. And so we help them to understand how they can best go about that. And for others, they may just have done too much work on this with their family, and nothing has changed for years. So we help them to try and find peace and a different way forward in their life, on their own, with new family, like, for example, a kinship family, friends, new partners, and ultimately to try and find a life that's nourishing for themselves beyond this issue. And so I think the organisation takes critically a non-judgmental stance on this.
Understood. We have heard of the expression ghosting, Sonia, when it comes to dating, right? People they just disappear, right? They don't return your calls, they don't return your texts and all that. Do you see any of that happening as it relates to family estrangement, that somebody just literally cuts somebody off with no apparent warning and they're just ghosted?
I do see that, and it's not as common as it is on online dating in particular. It's not that easy to just ghost your family. They pick up on it pretty easily. But certainly I'm finding more and more, I'm seeing people have difficulty in communicating around relationships and difficult relationships and how they may want to distance themselves. So they just deal with it by ghosting, by just not talking. A lot of times when people are estranged and they realize they're estranged, we haven't spoken. There's no actual talk about, hey, we're going to be estranged. It just happens. And sometimes it can happen to somebody who just least expects it. And I just also want to pick up on what we're talking about here too with regards to reconciling as well. If people want to do that, sometimes what I find when I work with people who are dealing with being at some stage of the estrangement process is that they are really wishing for their, say, for instance, an adult child, their parents to change, to apologize, to acknowledge something. And the work in therapy, whether or not they choose to reconcile or not with their family, is for them to process those feelings and to let go of that wish for their family to change, and to grieve what they couldn't have, and to see, as was talked about, is that their families are humans. There's much more complex. Not everyone's family is as ideal as they want it to be. So people can do that work of healing, the personal healing that they need to do. Sometimes they absolutely need to be disconnected from the family, but sometimes they may not need to. They just need to know that the work is their own.
So you can wait a long time for an apology, or you can accept the fact that it ain't going to happen and do the best you can.
Absolutely, and sometimes hope in the wrong places can also be maladaptive.
Joshua, how about this notion, Joshua, of ghosting? Do you see much of that, and do you think, is there ever a legitimate reason to simply ghost your parents who may be in their, 70s or 80s?
No, there's not. There's not a legitimate reason to just suddenly stop talking to somebody. I think, as Becca was saying earlier, in many cases, there has been an attempt to talk to the parent, to complain, etc. But not always. Sometimes people ghost because they have mental illness, or because they're too embarrassed that their spouse is saying, choose me or them, you can't have both. There's a lot of reasons for it. But otherwise, everybody deserves an explanation, particularly in a family relationship where the consequence is enormous heartbreak. I'm working not only with the parents, but also the adult children. And this is a source of enormous pain on both sides. And one of the other things that I want to go back to, we're talking a lot about this from a kind of an individualistic perspective of it may be better for the adult child to take a break. Well, it may well be, but estrangements are rarely dyadic or even triadic. When an adult child cuts off contact with a parent, it often divides families that fractures out in many ways. Typically, the adult child is the gatekeeper to the grandchildren. So if there's an estrangement between the parent, then that may, and the adult child, that may later mean that there's no contact with the grandparents and the grandchildren, even loving, dedicated grandparents. So again, I really want us to widen this conversation, look at this in a much more systemic way.
Becca, perhaps give us some advice on this. If you're an adult child and your children, who are genuinely children, come to you and the child says, how come we don't see grandma or grandpa anymore? How do you handle that moment?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think that in terms of handling that moment, I would always say for young children is to be very clear and very truthful with them about what's happening. I think that to cover it up and to deceive children will only come out in the end in a more difficult way. Lies that come out in adulthood, for example, can cause family estrangements themselves later down the line. So if we systemically start lying to children about things that are happening within our families, then it's not going to lead to stronger relationships in the end. And just to come back on Josh's point about grandchildren, then I think I want to come back to the point I've been saying about so many adult children feel they're kind of having a break from relationships or estranging from relationships because they want their grandchildren to be brought up around more healthy behaviours. And I think that if you don't see any kind of movement in the relationship or movement in the behaviour from, you know, the old elderly parents, let's say, it's going to be very hard for someone to say, oh, I want that around my grandchildren. I want that around my children. Like, you know, I think that's an incredibly hard thing to want to put your children in the way of harm. Like, that's what a lot of people who want to withhold that contact, that's exactly what they're trying to do, is protect their children.
Joshua?
That suggests that that one can't be a loving, dedicated grandparent and still have conflict with one's adult children. Plenty of people don't have great relationships with their adult children, but they're fantastic grandparents, and their grandchildren adore them. And I frequently work with parents who even by the adult child's own admission, say that they were good, loving grandparents. So this idea that if it's not good for the adult child, that it's toxic to the children, I think just isn't borne out by the evidence.
Well, okay, Sonia, let me try this with you. And again, on how honest you can be with the grandchildren, your own children, as it relates to grandparents. Can you be honest? Can you be this honest and say, your grandfather is a QAnon supporting nut job and I can't have him in our lives anymore? I mean, is that too honest for a child?
It's not about honesty, it's about sharing information in a developmentally appropriate way, in a way that they would understand, and it would be good for them. Children are sponges, they absorb, but they understand something's going on. So it's definitely very important to tell them something, such as there's disagreements between myself and your grandparents, and for that reason we can't communicate and spend time together. And just building on what Becca has said is that we've got to normalize the idea of that sometimes some relationships, they require some distancing, so that the people can grow in a healthy way. And a lot of times parents realize, I don't want to allow what my parents put in me to be put upon my children. And so that distance is important, and definitely you can communicate something that they would understand.
But Grandpa's a QAnon supporting nut job is probably not the best way to put it.
Yeah, it's kind of modeling for them, exactly. I mean, modeling for them hostility, the same kind of hostility that your grandparents are expressing. So you want to actually express it in a way that they can understand and learn from. And understand in society, there's a lot of people who disagree, and sometimes we have that in our family.
Gotcha.
I just want to say as well, I wasn't advocating any kind of hostile talk around
No,
I'm saying that not lying to them, basically saying we don't have a relationship at the moment, is probably more appropriate than trying to cover it up and say something, you know, that's
They're
a complete
too busy
story.
to see us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that, so I think, I wouldn't say you should, start to influence the relationship of the grandchild with the grandparent. So I think that kind of alienation is quite dangerous. But I do think that kind of, being honest about why we're not seeing grandparents is really important too.
I have seen, I got to tell you, Joshua, I have seen situations where parents, adult children, have told their parents, grandparents, if you don't get vaccinated, you're not seeing your grandchildren. I mean, that's the reality. So how much of COVID has influenced estrangement that we're seeing these days?
I am seeing that. And I see COVID as part of sort of the larger tribal political fracturing that's happening. But I definitely think that COVID has heated up people's anxieties. It's heated up kind of hostility around family relationships. And it's also heated up people's needs to establish boundaries with family members, which I think, as my co-panelists have said, it can be really useful and important, but boundaries also can keep people out as well. And so we just have to be careful about it. But absolutely, COVID has been an issue.
Sonia, you seeing that in your practice? COVID has related, or has resulted rather, in breaks among families because, you know, maybe someone doesn't want to get vaccinated, or maybe somebody is an anti-vaxxer, or all that kind of stuff.
COVID has certainly, as Joss indicated, amplified a lot of cracks in the family relationships and polarized people around political issues regarding vaccination, masking, and many political issues. And definitely there's been a lot of conflict around vaccination because in a lot of families, certain people got vaccinated, certain people didn't, and that causes a lot of arguments. And that means some people are not getting together for certain cultural celebrations.
Do you see this too?
I do think, yeah. I mean, it's like any big kind of thing that happens, it can be very divisive depending on where you sit, on what family lines you sit as well. And so, yeah, I do think that COVID has got a big impact on all relationships, and families included.
Joshua, let's talk discipline, because I guess there's an argument to be made that the older generation sometimes thinks the younger generation, their adult children, are too indulgent with their children/grandchildren. And therefore, the grandparents intervene, and the parents don't like it, and the grandchildren are amused by the whole damn thing. To what degree do you think that the bar becoming too low as to what's considered toxic parenting is at play here?
Well, I think the bar is way too low in terms of what's considered toxic parenting. And I think that parents have become very vigilant about how their children are treated, and very worried about them. And I think that that's partly the fault of, you know, people in my field. I think we've sort of done too much education about the potential harm to children, so that the idea that a parent's behavior is going to be hurtful has become a source of estrangement and conflict. There was a recent survey that said that something like 50% of grandparents have ongoing conflict with their adult children about grandparenting issues. So it's a very hot topic in families these days.
I can understand that grandparents sometimes meddle in parenting because they don't like the way that their adult children are parenting the grandchildren, those adult children's children, and you know, most grandparents won't run into trouble if they just keep their nose out of telling their children how to discipline their grandchildren, right? But sometimes they can't resist.
Right, that's true.
And does that become a source of estrangement over the years?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that some adult children feel like, look, if you can't respect my boundaries about how I want to raise my children, then you can't see me or my children. So I absolutely think that that's an issue.
Okay.
I'd like to come in there and say
Please.
that I've worked with a lot of people in my personal practice who have that issue exactly, of that their grandparents have just really intervened or kind of made big steps within what they think how their adult child should be parenting.
And they shouldn't do that, is your advice?
Yeah, I would absolutely say that you've got to give somebody the freedom to parent their child as they want to parent their child.
And make mistakes.
And make mistakes,
the way
of
they
course,
got
the
to.
way they did, yeah. Like, there's no, I don't think there's any formula, and I don't think there's any big right and wrong. And people are bringing up children now in a generation and a time that's very different to how they were brought up. They were themselves brought up by their grandparents. So I think it's really appropriate to have more time, space and freedom for adult children to bring their kids up as they wish to.
Sonia, talk to us about, in our remaining moments here, the road back to reconciliation. Do we assume that the best outcome all the time is that all parties figure out a way to get back together again?
Well, family estrangement is a complex process, and people in families, even the most loving families, have difficulty getting along. And in terms of whether they reconcile or not, that is something that is a decision that the person needs to make for themselves. They need to be much more, what I do is I help them understand what's leading to the problems in the relationship, what is contributing to how they feel and how they think, and to help them see if they'd wanted to, what that will entail for them in the end, how it'll help them, because sometimes it'd be very detrimental. It can really stop them from growing, as was talked about here with Josh and Becca, is that sometimes being together in a relationship can just cause more grief, more personal harm, and it may not be the best outcome. But the risk is that in trying to what we want to stay away from is the risk is that in trying to reconcile that we don't continue to perpetuate the problem for the individual. So just the answer to that question is it really depends.
It does, doesn't it? You can, so you can't, Becca, in your work say, the goal here is to get everybody singing Kumbaya in a circle after it's all said and done. That may not necessarily be the best option.
Well, no, not particularly for very in-depth issues like, childhood sexual abuse. Like, it can be incredibly difficult to have a relationship with somebody that's experienced that kind of dynamic within their families. And so many family estrangements stem from issues like that. So, it's beautiful if you can do what Brené Brown says, which is rupture and repair. And if you can really, if everyone can take part in the repair in a very genuine way and has the skills, the communication skills, the patience, the time, to really have empathy with each other, of course, that's a really amazing outcome and one that we would all want. But I think that unfortunately that isn't always what the human reality is in families, that some people don't have any time, space or inclination to actually see, hear or understand the other person. And they just think they should just put up with it, or that's just, the part of families. And I think, that means that it's incredibly difficult to sing Kumbaya together because you're not being seen as a human or ultimately respected. And we all want respect from everyone in our lives, right?
Joshua, in our last minute, can you tell us what percentage of people you think who are estranged eventually get back together and it works?
It's hard to get a good statistic about that. What I often tell people is if both the adult child and the parent, which is my area of specialization, are willing to engage in family therapy, then the chances are very high because I can kind of adequately represent both sides. As Sonia indicated earlier, typically estrangements are initiated by the adult child, which often means that the parent has to do more of the outreach. And I encourage parents to do that through showing empathy, taking responsibility, writing a letter of amends, showing compassion, not defending, not guilt-tripping, not explaining. And that seems to be the most successful pathway towards reconciliation. So for those parents who are able to do that work, and those adult children who are able and willing to accept that repair that Becca was talking about, then the success rate is very high.
I want to say as well, I just think that it has to be genuine. I think so many people are advising that, you should just say whatever to get the relationship back. But people know when something isn't truthful. And so I think it's really important to do something from the heart, which is where
you got to fix it.
Yes. I think you've got to genuinely look at yourself rather than just say what people want to hear.
Gotcha. Sheldon, can I have everybody up on screen all at once so I can thank Becca Bland, who's come all the way from the UK, from Standalone UK, Sonia Ahmed, the clinical psychologist, director of the Toronto Psychology Clinic, and Joshua Coleman. You can read more of his work in Rules of Estrangement, Why Adult Children Cut Ties and How to Heal the Conflict. It's great of all three of you to be with us here on TVO tonight. Many thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Imagine devoting your career to saving lives and keeping patients healthy until one day you discover that patients are actually asking you to help end, not save, their lives. Dr. Jean Marmorio was among the first doctors in Canada to take that path when doctor-assisted death became legal in this country. Her new book, co-written with Johanna Schneller, reveals the complexity of her thinking and experience. It's called The Last Doctor: Lessons in Living from the Front Lines of Medical Assistance in Dying. And Dr. Jean Marmorio joins us now here in our studio. It's great to have you here. Great to see you again.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here.
It's a tremendous book. It really is. It's a great book. You and Johanna did a fantastic job, and I want to just share. Let's start with an excerpt to set up our first question here, and then we'll get into this. Sheldon, if you would, the graphic, please. That flash of certainty I'd felt when I was on that treadmill watching the news, that I was one of the right people to do this work, was in part because I knew in my bones that my job as a MAID doctor was not to focus on the constraints and restrictions and hazards and why nots, but instead to show the way to yes. We physicians and nurses who would soon join the ranks were the ones who had to make these decisions because we have the expertise and the skill that comes from providing patient care on a daily basis. Our concern could not just be about doing the job legally. Our concern had to be about doing the right thing for our patients, as we tried to do for everyone in our practices. Can you take us back the significance of that flash of certainty on the treadmill?
Oh yeah, because I didn't think in my lifetime that I knew assisted dying would. I mean, everyone had been kind of wanting this for years and years. I didn't think it would happen in my lifetime. So when I saw that Chiron saying that the Supreme Court had ruled 9-0, it was like the light fell upon me. I knew immediately that I would be involved in this, and that does come from 45 years of practicing medicine, where I just had too many experiences when patients would take matters into their own hands, and the minute they did that, they withdrew from me. And I knew it was happening. Nobody would talk about it. They wouldn't talk to me about it. They wouldn't talk to their families about it. They went on a journey that was basically lonely, hazardous, difficult, and illegal, criminal, in fact.
What percentage of your patients do you think attempted suicide themselves rather than wait for a more humane option?
I think in those early days, because I had a young practice, so in those days, I think it was mostly people who had cancer diagnosis. And I think the fear at that point was just the misery of uncontrolled pain. And you could tell when they had kind of reached that point where they just knew it was going to get more and more difficult to stay alive. And I think we were trying our best. Palliative care was really in its infancy during all of that time. I think the whole symptom management programs were not great. So people had a lot more to fear about what the end of their lives could look like.
When you had this moment, this is clearly before any official legal process has been set up. There's no law. There's nothing at this stage. So you created a kind of a crash course for yourself and colleagues on how to do this. How did you know what that should involve?
I knew I needed to get back into sort of the whole flowering of palliative care. I knew I needed to kind of understand what the mechanisms were and what was involved in providing excellent palliative care. I wanted to do it in the city. I wanted to do it in the big teaching hospitals. That was where I was working. I wanted to do it in regional hospitals. I wanted to do it in the burbs. I wanted to get into hospices. So it was basically to inform myself. I had a year. And I thought, I need to kind of do a lot of bring me up to par so that I would really know when I actually started to do the work, when people sort of needed to know what was available. We knew that that would be part of what you had to do in terms of assessing eligibility. What was available, what had been offered, what had people done, what had been provided. So I knew I needed to have a lot more background in all of that before I started.
There's that word again. You say provided. You call this a provision. You are making a provision.
We do. We don't help people commit suicide. I know some people use assisted suicide and euthanasia. My feeling is that I provide care. And I provide care right to the end of life. I've provided care from birth to death. For me, it's the right word to use because I think we provide the service for what people are asking us to do for them. It's a part of care.
Yolanda, your first provision.
Well, she wasn't the first, but Yolanda's story weaves her way through the entire book because she came into my life at the end of the first year, but I didn't provide her with an assisted death until year 3. And at the end of the first year, she was eligible as far as I was concerned. She had had lung transplant, she'd had cancer. I turned her over to the transplant team thinking they would look after her. I actually thought she was dead when she suddenly emailed me on year 3 to say, I need your help. So she weaves through the whole book. And it's Yolanda who was basically the genesis of this book, truly.
Do you want to call what happened to her a kind of a death party? Did she have a death party?
She had a magnificent party. She had at least 30 people in that room. They had flown in from all over the world in stages. But the day that it happened, there were 30 people in that room. It was a grand celebration. And because when we started, the nurse hadn't arrived to put the IV lines in so that I could deliver the drugs that would end her life. And we were scrambling and we waited and we had to wait an extra 20 minutes, which took us past the 10 o'clock hour. I think it was her brother who said, oh, the LCBO is open. And he ran down the street to get more champagne. So, you know, it was like pause and then carry on with the big party.
And the significance of being past that 10 o'clock hour was what?
Oh, the provision was set for 10 o'clock. Yolanda had wanted her body donated back to UHN for research. She had a really, really rare disease. And so she was offering her body, but they were coming to pick it up at 10:30 because we had to deliver her body to UHN for the surgical team.
University Health Network.
Yeah, the University Health Network by 1 o'clock. And so it was, they arrived, they weren't supposed to arrive, and still the nurse hadn't come to put the lines in. So it was basically a reminder that no matter how well you plan things, don't expect it to just go the way you want it.
You know, there are going to be people watching this or listening to this who are going to think a death party, a celebration of ending her life in this way sounds off.
Macabre?
Yeah, macabre is a better word. Did you think that at all?
No, I have never thought that. I work very hard to bring families together, to kind of have a celebration of life before the death. And I think for the most part, it always astonishes me. It's tremendously rewarding. I think not just for me as the observer, but I think in terms of the family dynamics, there have been so many atonements, so many coming back, so many issues resolved, so much to say, so little time to say it. And I've watched, and the theme always runs the same. You hear people say, look after one another, take care of one another. Many iterations of that, but the theme is always the same. When the family members are there, the person who is about to sort of depart this life will look at them and say, look after one another, be kind.
That says it all, doesn't it?
Oh, it does. Yeah. It does.
Let's make a contrast between that example of Yolanda and Sheila, another one of your patients who did not ultimately qualify for MAID.
No.
Is that right? What happened there?
Sheila is the great, you know, unfinished business in this book. Sheila was 68. She had a very kind of rare, rapidly progressive dementia. And at the time that she was asking to have an assisted death, we were just too early in the game. We just didn't understand what we would be able to do to help somebody with Alzheimer's, an Alzheimer's condition, to realize their wishes before they lost capacity. So Sheila, of course, I mean, her strongest advocate now, and the person who is really responsible for her ongoing day-to-day care.
She's still alive.
She is still alive. She is in a secure facility. And her daughter is, I think, the strongest advocate I've ever heard about advance requests, which are not legal yet. But Lisa could actually do a parliamentary review panel and tell everybody why an advance request was really something that needs to be done. Certainly that I would like for myself. And most people who've passed 75 are so afraid of kind of ending up, as Sheila has done, just a kind of a husk without sort of words, without knowing anybody, really needing kind of round-the-clock care for the most basic functions and not knowing who they are, where they are.
Let's just understand this. She was not in a position to give informed consent to physician-assisted death.
Yeah.
And what you would like to see is some kind of provision, there's that word again, in a future law or a future amendment
yeah.
that would allow for what?
Would allow for somebody, once they had a diagnosis of Alzheimer's, once they'd actually sat with a clinician or a gerontologist and gone through what the prognosis was, that they would be able to set out a document that clearly states when all of the following criteria are met, like they don't know their children's names, they need to be fed, they have to be diapered and changed, somebody has got to turn them, somebody has got to get them off the toilet and pull their pants up because they don't know how to do that. When these conditions are met, that somebody can end their life even though they do not know at that time what they are consenting to.
Because they can't give consent at that moment and their death is not imminent when the paperwork needs to be filled out.
Yeah. I mean, and to be clear, we have taken a very broad view of Alzheimer's in terms of looking at it as a life-ending condition. So I'm very comfortable working within a 10-year time frame, but that means that I really need to be talking to that person a lot over time, so that when I know that they are close to losing capacity, I can say you must set a date. So we work within the legislative boundaries. It's not easy, though. And I think advance requests would relieve a lot of anxiety for a lot of people in this country over 75 years of age.
Do you think that day is coming when this advance consent will be a part of the law?
I hope so. I hope so.
But you're not sure.
I don't think assisted dying in Canada would have happened unless the Canadian public, over 85% of the Canadian public, wanted this. The Supreme Court of Canada heard this. The Supreme Court of Canada is really a kind of a living judiciary that kind of really responds, I think, to the needs that the Canadians are expressing.
A living tree, I think, is how Rosalia Bella described it.
And Rosalia Bella has got that one right, I think.
Let's do one more example here. Tom.
Oh, yeah.
Why did you need to tell Tom's story? That was a hard one.
Well, that was, yeah, Tom almost broke me. And in fact, Tom's story, as told in the book, is probably no different from what we are now doing on an ongoing basis with everybody who is what we call track 2, which means that their natural death is not reasonably foreseeable. So that opens the door for a lot of people who have decades of living with chronic illness states, chronic diseases, chronic pain states, multiple chemical sensitivities. I mean, this has been in the media a lot because people are kind of waving the banner over that about, you know, if you have not looked after all the social needs of the population, you cannot be offering them an out. You cannot say it's easier to die than it is to have decent living conditions. But I think with Tom, he was in my early days, so, you know, in many ways he represents a lot of what you have to deal with people who have got really chronic disabilities, have lived with them for decades, and their life has contracted and contracted until what you're dealing with are people who are mostly alone. They've lost a lot of the connections that they've had before, and they just don't have any reason to carry on. So with Tom, I got really deeply involved in how we could actually offer him better pain relief. And I went way into it, and of course failed. I mean, we failed him miserably. Not miserably, but we failed.
What do you mean you failed him?
Well, we were trying to get him better pain relief. And you know, it's risky when you sort of get involved. I think it was, when I say he'd lost a lot of his connections, he'd also lost his family doctor, his pastor, he'd lost his partner. So he was basically not really connected very well. At least I thought he wasn't connected very well. It turns out, of course, he did have connections. But a lot of them didn't really surface until it was almost too late for him. And by that time, he was demanding. He was telling us we had failed him, and we should just give him release. Give him release.
What's your view on the amendment made that Parliament is now considering and expects to bring in by March of next year on whether suffering from mental health problems and mental illness ought to be justification enough for MAID?
Wow. I think we all have a little mental illness from time to time. So I think it's not that. I think it's a mental disorder that's really going to be the criteria of eligibility. And truly, I think we just have to bring all Canadians into this scenario. You cannot exclude somebody because they have got a DSM-5 diagnosis of major depressive disorder or personality disorder. I think every Canadian has got to have this right to sort of seek an assisted death if that is their wish. My job is to kind of hear suffering, see it and hear it. And I think psychiatrists have got to kind of bear this burden like all the rest of us in terms of saying, yes, you've done your best, you've done everything you can, but are you hearing what this person is saying?
Let me pick up on that, because there's a quote in the book. This is very serendipitous, because this is exactly the next quote from the book I was going to read about hearing. Here we go. Sheldon, I'm bored too. As I left the hospital, you write, I felt no conflict in my soul. Sometimes people ask me, but what about your Hippocratic oath? First, do no harm. Believe me, a lot of what physicians do is harmful. We can cause harm and perpetuate suffering in the name of keeping someone alive. More chemotherapy, more radiation, always one more thing to try. We're trained not to hear when someone says, I want to go. I want to follow up on that. You really think doctors are trained not to hear their patients when their patients have had it?
There are two issues, I think, there. I think I think doctors are dedicated to cure, to relieving pain, relieving suffering, and cure. There's always one more thing. The psychiatry is the case in point here. There may be kind of treatments. I mean, the psychedelics are kind of the new kid on the block right now. Oh my gosh. We will not be able to provide for anybody if they've not had their crack at psychedelics. I don't care where you're at. But I also think because they're so fixed on the next step, one more way to relieve it, they're not actually, it's not that they don't listen to the patient, but the patient doesn't really have an option to sort of say, am I involved in this process in any way? Do you need to hear what I'm feeling? And for sure, I mean, the vast majority of people want everything that can be offered. They want the next step. They want to live with hope and not failure. So there's a bit of a conspiracy, there's a bit of a collusion here in terms of saying, I'm not going to give you the worst scenario because I want to give you the best. And I think patients, on the other hand, say, I want to hear the best. Don't take away my hope. And every part of psychiatry, for that matter, is based on hoping that you can actually resolve a problem. Same with congestive heart failure, the same with kidney, even people on dialysis will go on, because they want to know that there's hope for them to kind of just keep living.
You know, the critics of this thing, though, are concerned that we are going to get to a point where not just the 4 or 5% of people who are eligible for this will do it, as is now the case, but that they're concerned half the population is going to want to do it someday, and they think that that's just way over the line. What do you think?
I think they need to rest a little bit. I think this will not happen. I think people really want life. I think people really want connection. I think they really want hope. I think they really want to care for other people in their lives around them. So I don't think people are going to say it's easier to die than it is to live, even if you're living with trouble. That's what I see.
This whole, well, there are lots of critics who say there's a death cult right now going on in the Western world where we're making it easier for people to die as opposed to figuring out ways to keep people alive. You're not buying that, obviously.
No, I'm not buying that. I'm not buying that. I think even when I wrote this book, there's 7 stories. There are 7 patient stories in this book. 5 of the 7 had attempted suicide, but they didn't attempt suicide because it was easy. They attempted suicide because they were alone. They needed to kind of know that they weren't alone. And the minute you were able to do that for them, people sort of settled down. They actually, I think, had better lives. They had longer lives for sure. And they didn't have the horror and the misery of actually trying to end their life in desperation, because I think that's what drives people to ask for help to die, is that if you don't help them, you leave them alone and you leave them desperate.
How long were you a full-time doc for?
45 years.
45 years, okay. So you've got lots of experience on the front lines and you know about this. I want to share with you a conversation I had not too long ago with another doctor who said to me, I know the population right now is very interested in MAID and they think it's a new thing. But he said, the reality is, this doctor said, the reality is we've been doing this unofficially, we doctors and nurses, for a very long time. We've talked with the families of patients who, when we say to them, your loved one is in a persistent vegetative state or they're not coming back, and then they'll say, well, then don't take heroic measures. And I mean, is that the reality? We've been practicing MAID unofficially in this country for a long time anyway.
It's criminal.
What is?
Helping somebody die in that fashion. I mean, I think physicians in the past have probably aided and helped. It's been undercover. It has not been able to be spoken about. It's not talked about, for sure.
So it's better now because it's transparent and legal.
Well, it is legal, but it's more than just that. I think it actually gives families, it certainly gives people an opportunity to really have dignity in what they're doing, to really kind of know that this request to have the kind of death which kind of matches the life they've lived, which is one that they, in fact, can be proud of, that they have worked hard at, that they have accomplished things, that they know what they want to kind of share, and they know what their legacy is in terms of what they want to sort of pass on to their family and their children. So I think being able to bring that into the open, to be able to kind of know that you can have that expressed and shared, and that you don't have to bury it. Oh my goodness. I mean, I would never want to go back to those old days. Not ever.
Do you think the new days are subject to abuse at all?
I think everything is subject to mistake. I don't think we're going to get it perfect. I mean, I think if this book showed me anything, it was like how you stumbled. I mean, there are lots of ways to stumble, and there are lots of ways to make mistakes. But I think you kind of come through saying, do you feel you've done your best? Do you feel that you've done all that you could? Because that's what lets you sleep at night. And if you think you're in a real sticky mess and you're not going to find your way through it very easily, you don't sleep at night. But I think what happens now, and certainly with Track 2, you have to involve many more people. You've got to involve the care teams, you've got to involve the rehab people, you've got to involve the consultants. So I think the whole point now of knowing that you're not just helping somebody die who's dying, but you're helping somebody who's not living well, is that when you actually have to explore all the things that are available, when you actually have to address what we call as the structural vulnerabilities here, people with violent pasts and PTSD, and that you actually are involving a lot more people in that circle of care. So we're actually reaching out more. I call a doctor now and I say, I am with the ministry's, assisted dying. They call me back. They call me back.
So that shows something.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's much more involved in the process. There are many more people now putting their fingers in the pot, so to speak, to sort of say, maybe we can do more. Maybe we should try something different. So it's different.
This is a not only timely and important book, but it's really honest. You've really pulled the curtain back. So good for you. The Last Doctor, Lessons in Living from the Front Lines of Medical Assistance in Dying, Dr. Jean Marmorio, along with Johanna Schneller. Thanks, Dr. Jean, for being here tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And that is the agenda for Monday, December 12th, 2022. Tomorrow, how to talk to young people about cannabis, online hate, and a leaner holiday season than usual. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.